Hey there, guys. All right, today we're doing it. Modern Classics Summarized 1984. You guys, I've done maybe one or two videos already that deal around 1984. You guys know, one, I am not a fan of dystopia already. Really, the only dystopia that I have enjoyed so far in terms of books is the Hunger Games trilogy. In terms of entertainment shows and whatnot, Last of Us 1, I would call dystopia zombie apocalypse. Um, Last of Us 1. Did not care for Last of Us 2 though. There was this show on TNT, I think the channel was called Falling Skies, which had a really cool premise and I thought was very solid for the first couple seasons. But then the last two seasons really fell off hard. Um, I don't know if anyone else watched that show. It's been years since it ended, but yeah, I'm not a fan of this. It's too it's just it's nihilistic. It's just right. 1984 is just not happy, and I'm not. I am a fan of tragedies, right? But tragedy has to have a hope in it. 1984 doesn't have anything happy in it. It's just depressing. Not my cup of tea. So remember, all of that prefaced before I start talking about what I dislike about the book. Okay? My internal biases here towards the book. The book is already fighting an extremely uphill battle to try and impress me. But also, I think the author has terrible prose. I do not like his writing style. It's unengaging. Um, the protagonist is a piece of shit. The protagonist sucks. Absolute terrible person. Why the fuck do I want to be in the mind of this protagonist? He sucks. He's terrible. Get him out of here. He fantasizes about assaulting a woman, his coworker, which by the way, someone said like, yeah, you have fantasies, you just don't act on them. It's like you can fantasize about having sex. That's consensual. Normal people have that. People fantasize about fucking each other, right? But they fantasize about it being consensual. They don't fantasize it about taking control away from another fucking person. If you're fantasizing about taking control away from another person in that manner, you should probably see a therapist. In my unprofessional advice, because I've never thought about that. Okay, it's a little right. Yes, sometimes we have the intrusive thought of wanting to punch someone in the like. Sometimes we're like, that dude looks punchable. That's also different. It's different, right? Wanting to just like kind of like looking at someone just for a brief second, thinking, I want to punch that guy, and then you're just like, I'm moving on. Fantasizing about assault. No, no, no. I don't trust you if you're like that. Just saying. Now that we got that out of the way, before we dive into the video itself, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you join the Discord, and please do go and follow me over at Twitch, and do go check out the gaming channel here on YouTube. Really still trying to push that, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, with all that said, let's go ahead and dive in. Um, yeah.
I don't think I ever really got dystopias. Actually, I think dystopias might just be too familiar to a kid. The people in charge have weird arbitrary rules about what kind of things you can draw or say. They insist that you treat them with respect, even though the only thing they have over you is age and authority. They don't tend to be as objective or fair as one would like, and to top it all off, you live with the knowledge that if you step out of line, one of your fellow kids might tattle on you. A dystopia is
Damn. All right, 20 seconds in, and Red has hit me like a truck with some facts. Yeah, I never really thought of it in that way, but she's 100% correct with that statement.
Written with the overwhelming attitude that the characters are largely powerless, but a kid already knows what that's like. It's only when you become an adult and get used to having some kind of power that a dystopia really starts to sink in. After getting used to having autonomy, a story where autonomy is impossible stops sounding like so much fun, and it becomes less sticking it to your mean school principal and more getting your kneecaps confiscated by the secret police. And I'd say out of all the modern dystopias, the one with the least potential for fun is probably 1984. Now, 1984 was written in 1949 by George Orwell, and it was pretty much 100% social commentary in Orwell's criticisms of both Hitler and Stalin, who, despite being at opposite ends of the political spectrum, struck him as frighteningly similar. As a result, the antagonist of the story, the party in control, manages to be completely unidentifiable party-wise and could fall on either extreme of the spectrum. Unpersoning, the thought police, and the party interrogation methods are all thinly veiled reskins of Stalinist Russia, but Newspeak, Doublethink, and the Ministry of Truth have shades of Nazi Germany in their influences. It's kind of an apolitical fusion of both totalitarian regimes. Our POV character
It might also that might also be one thing that stuck out to me and why looking back on the book I really do not like it. Because it doesn't not really taking a stance. I am someone that right now I am right a Tolkien nerd. I agree with Tolkien's statement on what was it? What's the term called? Can't remember what the term is called, but Tolkien did not like allegory. Um, I think the way um how to phrase it? Right, like you can make a statement without it being allegory, right? Tolkien is making statements constantly throughout his book, but it is not allegory. Feels it is what the statements that he is making applies to his fantastical world does not just apply, right? It isn't just him pulling from our world and putting it into there and making commentary on it. Um 1984 doesn't really take a stance with the world. It doesn't take a stance with the outside, with our world, and it doesn't take a stance within its own world, in my eyes. Um, Hunger Games takes a stance, right? It picks a side. Um, which is probably why I like it because it is very blatant on which side it is taking. And I enjoy that more. Um, because that helps weed out pieces of shit. It really does. When you have like this is a problem within the Elder Scrolls series specifically really became a problem with the Stormcloaks and the Empire. Now, I am personally on the side of the Stormcloaks mainly because they are suffering from a genocide and within world everyone is racist towards each other, which by the way is a problem is a separate problem within the fantasy genre. The racism, like kind of the I think the term used is Warhammer fantasy. For that, where everyone is just hates each other and they're just racist towards each other. The conflict doesn't really exist so much through their history, but it exists through just they're a different. They look different. We hate them for that, right? That's the fantasy that Elder Scrolls kind of is. Um, Although the Argonians, I think, are pretty justified in hating the Dark Elves because I think the Dark Elves enslaved them. Uh, but anyways, that's one instance of them having a justified history, sort of hatred and mistrust, kind of Helio. But like within the Elder Scrolls fandom, we have a lot, like within which is also stated kind of within the game itself when it comes to the Stormcloaks, that the problem the Stormcloaks have is that they nationalists and racists flock to the Stormcloak banner because of the terminology that is being used and because Ulfric isn't really doing anything to stamp it out, even though he may personally not believe in that racism. Because supposedly there could be something I've heard some things online that people say that like um Ulfric himself may not be racist. However, what he is doing, what his faction, because he is, we're gonna give him the benefit of the doubt here. We're gonna give him benefit of the doubt because he is so hyper focused on just winning the war and Skyrim post war, right? He's like, we've got to prepare for war, blah blah blah. We got to prepare to fight off the Thalmor too, or something like that, blah blah blah. Since he's so hyper focused on fighting the war, he isn't really dealing with the internal problems that will come post war, specifically with racial issues. Um, Now I'm rusty. I don't know if, uh, right, like, and also the statement of Skyrim is for the Nords. It's not it is not inherently a racist statement. However, because of the people that use it, it has become one within world. It has become sort of it has become a racist statement. Now, of course, despite that, I am still on the side of the Stormcloaks purely because they are facing genocide and racism from the Cyrodiilic Empire, right? Uh, the General Tullius is racist towards Nords. He makes a lot of statements against Nords that come across in my head as racist. Um, and the Empire is an empire. Y'all know, watching if you watch me like just watch like 2 videos from me, it becomes quite blatantly clear how anti-imperial I am. It doesn't take long to figure that out, right? So, right, that the Empire is fighting an uphill battle to try and win me over. And the Empire is also, in of itself, seems to be an archaic government that is past its time within world. So, time for them to probably leave and write self-determination for the people of Tamriel, I think, is the future to go down. Now, here's the thing. Because the developers wanted the players to have choice, right? They don't they did a both sides thing, right? There's plenty of information here to find that really can pull you one way or the other. It just depends upon how you rank that information on your own personal morality and logic, right? There are valid arguments to be on the Imperial side, just like there are valid arguments to be on the Stormcloak side, right? But because of that, they don't. The game is not taking a stance. Therefore, it isn't really doing anything to outright state, "Hey, the racist Nords, the racists, a part of Ulfric's, the nationalist racists, a part of Ulfric's uh, faction." The game does nothing to really tell you outright that that's bad. Now, of course, you can make the statement that you can make the argument that we shouldn't have that, right? People shouldn't need to be outright told why racism bad, right? Fortunately, the racist people in our world will latch on to that, right? If the game isn't telling them that that's bad, right? They will latch onto it and be defensive of it and toxic about it, blah blah, and online, right? Which is why a lot of Stormcloak supporters online are very toxic, and I do not like them. But yeah. Anyways, that was a tangent. But yeah, now again, I am a big fan of the Elder Scrolls franchise just because it is makes up a large portion of my childhood. Um, but there is right the shows the problem of the whole not taking a stance. Um, Tolkien takes a very clear stance as to where he uh believes in things and stuff like that, righteousness and whatnot. A Song of Ice and Fire very clearly takes a stance. The Lannisters are not the good people. It is very clearly that the Starks are good people based upon how they rule, right? He is essentially making a Machiavellian statement about Tywin's the fear Tywin used to rule only lasted within Tywin's lifetime, and now that Tywin is dead, the fear of the Lannisters is completely evaporated, right? Um, Whereas the Starks, even though the majority of them are assumed dead, the North still loves the Starks because the Starks have, throughout time, been consistent with how they have treated their vassals, their subjects. And Ned Stark himself was an exceptionally honorable man. And so they are being remembered and loved and essentially immortalized and because of who they were as people, right? That is a statement. 1984, to me, from what I remember, again, I have not reread the book. I'm only remembering it's been 7 dog barking. Hold up. Right. Gotta remember, I'm recalling information on 1984 from several years ago. I read it first semester, senior year of high school. I am, oh my God, uh, three, essentially this year will be my 3rd year post college, right? I graduated in 2021. So it's been quite some time. Been quite a while. Um, since I was read it when I was 17 because it was before my birthday, and I am 25 now. So yeah, um, to me, 1984 never really took a stance, and I don't like that inherently.
Winston is basically a conduit by which Orwell can discuss his thoughts on the
I can't
political
remember
climate.
what original point I was trying to make here. So yeah,
The book is essentially a series of events interspersed with inner monologue essays as Winston tries to reconcile his thoughts on the party and the nature of reality. Now, our story begins with our hero Winston writing down his thoughts on life in his personal illegal diary hidden from the camera in his room. Winston is just your average Joe government worker. He's got a job he hates, a coworker he's got a crush on, and a crushingly dystopic government hovering over him that has him and everyone else under the constant monolithic surveillance of the godlike Big Brother. Truth is whatever the party claims it
yeah, I wouldn't really call it. He fantasizes about doing bad things.
to be, and the only entertainment to be found is in the regular public executions of prisoners in war and citizens that dared step a toe out of line. Mondays, am I right? So Winston is an employee at the Ministry of Truth, the innocently named government agency in charge of dispensing truths to the eager citizens at large. But of course, the normal truth is nowhere near accurate enough for the illustrious party, so instead of relying on the facts of reality to conform to the narrative they need, the party instead makes liberal use of, shall we say, alternative facts in order to keep their citizens quote-unquote informed. That way, if the party benefits from the citizens believing that 2 + 2 = 5 for a day, the party can say it with confidence and their citizens will happily oblige. Or at least they'll be smiling. So the citizens are routinely subjected to this thing called the 2 minutes of hate, wherein Goldstein, the party traitor supposedly bent on bringing Oceania to its knees, spews a whole mess of propaganda about the party and how it's wrong and evil and tyrannical and junk. Interestingly, we're directed by the author to observe the fact that a persistent fear brought on by the 2-minute hate is that even though the propaganda is obviously lies, someone less level-headed might be taken in by it. This obviously promotes a feeling of persistent paranoia that the people around you might have been brainwashed by the opposition. But it also ends up promoting the tactic of sticking one's fingers in one's ears and not listening to the opposition's arguments in case they end up making too much sense. Because if your enemies make sense to you, that must mean they've successfully brainwashed you. As the hate continues, listening citizens get more and more freaked out, shouting and screaming over the broadcast to drown out the voice in order to avoid listening to the words that might subvert them from loyal citizens into spies and rebels if they let the message sink in. The message here is pretty clear. Listening to people you disagree with is ill-advised by the party, because what'll happen if you start agreeing with them? Better to pretend like nobody else could have a valid perspective. After all, there's
Again, I hate on this book a lot. There are some things here that are very valid, like this bit here is very valid, right? And this is again a point. This is a moment where Orwell is taking a stance here on something. Now it isn't an amazing stance. It's a very much yeah no shit stance, right? But still a stance, and it works, right? It makes logical sense within world and out of world.
there's only one truth, and it's whatever the party says it is. It's worth noting that
And it applies to our real world, but then again, it takes a very, you know, the overarching problem of because Orwell was an anti-socialist, right? That problem persists of he's right? It's ugh,
that even though
there's
it looks like
problems.
Orwell is
I
prompting
don't
the
know
idea
how to
that fair
word
and
a
reasoned
phrase.
debate is the only real way to oppose the party, that because one side is shouted down, the solution must be to listen to what they're saying, he's actually kind of subverting that idea. Because, see, there is no reasoned debate, because the party is everything, and the opposition is an illusion. The party produces the illusion of alternative perspectives to convince their citizens that those perspectives have been fairly defeated, when in actuality all they're doing is propping up straw men and tearing them down as a show of strength. But the thing is,
And again, continuing on, I will praise this because this is well done. This is right. It isn't outwardly stated in the text, but as Red is explaining here and extrapolating, like this is what you can infer from this or whatever, right? The meaning behind what this does. Yeah, this is well done. This is well written.
even though there is no real opposition in the form of Goldstein's party, the party does occasionally face real internal opposition from citizens that have failed to be properly assimilated. And in those cases, we see the failure of quote unquote reasoned debate, because our citizens are usually in the right. They're usually having a crisis of faith brought on by the collision between real truth and what the party claims truth to be. And they only lose because the party gets to redefine truth and essentially break the citizen's mind until they agree. What may look like reasoned debate is actually unwinnable from one end because the other is defining the nature of truth itself. It's not always possible to defeat someone who's demonstrably wrong, because there will always be people who believe them no matter what they or you say. People are stubborn, and it's not always possible to change someone's mind. It doesn't make them right, it doesn't make you wrong. Orwell talks more about this later. The bad news for our buddy Winston is that while he was having his flashback, apparently all his suppressed hatred of living in the iconic dystopia had boiled over, and he's written "Down with Big Brother" in big letters all over his diary, which means he's officially committed a thought crime, and the thought police are pretty much.
Thought crime is the criminal act of holding unspoken beliefs or doubts that oppose or question the ruling party. In the book, the government attempts to control not only the speech and actions, but also the thoughts of subjects. To entertain unacceptable thoughts is known as crime think in newspeak. The ideologically purified dialect of the party, crime stop is a way to avoid crime think by immediately purging dangerous thoughts from the mind. A note to the edgelords, thought crime does not mean attitudes you hold that will make people think you're an asshole. We already have a word for that. It's called being an asshole. And nobody is going to drag you off to a secret government facility and torture you until your brain breaks for just being an asshole. And this is the thing that I'm talking about when it comes to the edgelords, what I was saying earlier. Because of the way that Orwell chooses to depict Big Brother, right? There is a certain group of people that go towards 1984 and will point to it as this book defends them or whatever. I don't think I need to blatantly say which group of people that is coming from a leftist American, right? I think you guys can, it's not hard to figure out who the problematic people are in our modern day. That will that use authors that and writers that do not blatantly that don't outright pick a side and try and play both sides kind of thing, right? You have these people, you have these edgelords and dumbasses going to books like 1984, going to places that do the whole both sides thing, right? And using that to defend their actions. And that is one of the problems that I have with 1984. Anyways, however, they might call you an asshole or ask that you stop acting like an asshole. This is not the same thing as thought policing, which is a government mandated system of suppression that does far more than simply make you feel like an asshole. People can and will judge you based on what you say or think on account of being people with opinions. It is not thought policing for them to voice their opinions on your opinion. Please stop bastardizing the word just to make your whining feel more justified. Orwell would not sympathize. Eh, I don't know how much about that one. Orwell may not have been a good person. I don't know. But yeah, I'm that kind of statement I don't agree with being made just because we don't know Orwell personally, right? Um uh we don't know how he would have changed into the modern day, what his thoughts would be and such like that. but death of the author.
much inevitably going to find him and do horrible dystopian things to him. Whoopsie. Now, one of the many joys of living in dystopic London is that literally nobody
yeah,
can
see,
be trusted.
If the book itself had not done the whole both sides thing, I don't believe Red would have needed to make that statement on thought crime.
Like ever. Children are taught from a young age to recognize and report treasonous behavior, like wearing foreign shoes or not being super chill all the time, and the behavior extends into adulthood, where anything less than ideal citizenship is liable to be reported by even one's closest comrades. On top of that, almost all the citizens are under near constant surveillance, where although it's not guaranteed that they're being watched at all times, it is guaranteed that they could be being watched at any time. It's like your laptop webcam. Winston believes that this has led to a loss of unconditional love, as it's now impossible to carry on any kind of close relationship with any degree of privacy, and trust is a thing of the largely erased past. So as Winston does his party-mandated morning workout, he contemplates the fact that the most terrifying thing about the party is the nigh-universal gaslighting that it's been doing to its citizens for decades. See, the party really likes claiming that certain things happened and certain things didn't, and since nobody else keeps records, who do you trust? Your own memories, or the grand and illustrious party? After all, your memories are tiny. They only exist in the 3 pounds of sponge that lives in your head. But the party? Well, the party's huge. The party's everything. So obviously they're more likely to be right than you are, right? How real are your memories? How real is your past? Someone's personal existence seems very small and unlikely when faced with the universal insistence that it never happened. So the party has turned this unending existence.
And this is another thing. So one thing I will say, very cool concepts. But I just think Orwell's prose I did not like it. I did not find his way of writing engaging, which is where really the book suffers. A lot of the time, when it comes to books, in my opinion, the ideas tend to always be good, right? Humans are very good at we're very good at coming up with ideas. Where we suffer a lot of the time is expressing those ideas and writing them and explaining them and getting them across. I think a lot of the time we can be very, very bad at that. Orwell, I think, is one of those people that is very bad at getting these things across. Doublethink. Doublethink is the act of simultaneously accepting two mutually contradictory beliefs as correct, often in distinct social contexts. Doublethink is related to, but differs from, hypocrisy and neutrality. Also related is cognitive dissonance, in which contradictory beliefs cause conflict in one's mind. Doublethink is notable due to a lack of cognitive dissonance, thus the person is completely unaware of any conflict or contradiction. In the novel, its origin within the typical citizen is unclear. While it could be partly a product of Big Brother's formal brainwashing programs, the novel explicitly shows people learning doublethink and newspeak due to peer pressure and a desire to fit in or gain status within the party, to be seen as a loyal party member. In the novel, for someone to even recognize, let alone mention, any contradiction within the context of the party line was akin to blasphemy and could subject that someone to disciplinary action and to the instant social disapproval of fellow party members. I think this is very interesting, the whole thing of doublethink and stuff like that, because our memories are very flawed, right? That is something that is inherent. Like, psychologists. I remember when I took a psychology class, my professor was essentially like, yeah, human memory is flawed, right? And so to take advantage of that, propaganda will take advantage of that. This is, again, a concept. Again, this is where Orwell has a very good idea. However, I think the way he writes and the way he tried to get it across just not work for me. Or, well, I think everything surrounding it, right? These things are very interesting, and the way Big Brother rules the population, very interesting. It's just being in the mind of our protagonist of 1984 is just god awful.
Existential crisis into something of an art form called doublethink. Doublethink is the art of simultaneously accepting two fundamentally contradictory concepts. For example, the idea both that
I have been rambling a lot. We are 6 minutes into this video. It's a 21-minute video, and I have rambled for 30 minutes. I'm going to try and
democracy is impossible,
not.
And that the party is a bastion of democracy. You know, stuff like
I have
that.
other things to
Doublethink is a
do.
necessity for every loyal citizen, but poor Winston can't seem to get the hang of it. He always hits a snag when he has to choose between his observed reality and the party's version of reality. So Winston goes to work and sets about doing his job, which includes such matters as rewriting various forecasts to have been retroactively accurate. For example, some government promises need to be unpromised, and everyone's favorite Big Brother needs to have a recent speech retroactively corrected in light of current events. See, the party is by definition prediction always right. So whenever they make a prediction that turns out to be tragically misquoted in a way that would make it seem like they were wrong, the misprint needs to be retroactively corrected and all evidence of the mistake destroyed. That way, the party gets to still be always right without having to actually do anything right. They also have a machine that makes pop music, because it wouldn't be a dystopia without one. But the most complicated and rewarding part of Winston's job is definitely unpersoning people. See, whenever the party sees fit to disappear someone, they have to be completely unpersoned, meaning no record of their existence can be anywhere. And depending on how illustrious that person was, this means that sometimes Winston has to rewrite speeches from Big Brother himself if he happened to have congratulated the accomplishments of someone who has now never existed. So Winston takes his lunch break with a coworker, Syme, who's been tasked with compiling the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary. Newspeak being a paring down of the English.
In the Principles of Newspeak, the appendix to the 1949 novel, George Orwell explains that Newspeak usage follows most of the English grammar, yet is a language characterized by a continually diminishing vocabulary, complete thoughts reduced to simple terms of simplistic meaning. Linguistically, the contractions of Newspeak, Ingsoc, English Socialism, Mini-True, Ministry of Truth, etc. derive from the syllabic abbreviations of Russian, which identify the government and social institutions of the USSR, such as Politburo, Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Comintern, Communist International, Kolkhoz, Collective Farming, and Komsomol, Young Communist League. The long-term political purpose of the new language is for every member of the party and society, except the proles, the working class of Oceania, to exclusively communicate in Newspeak. By the year AD 2050, during that 66-year transition, the usage of Old Speak and English shall remain interspersed among Newspeak conversations.
Language that Big Brother hopes will be able to eliminate thought crime entirely by removing the freedom of thought required to have illegal thoughts. Syme is pretty explicit about the nature of the whole thing, which leads Winston to conclude that he's probably going to get vaporized one of these days, not for disloyalty, but for being too honest with his loyalty. But Winston notices one of his coworkers, a girl who works at the fiction department, giving him a kind of weird look, which he immediately interprets to mean that she somehow sensed his traitorous thoughts and is already planning on handing him over to the thought police. This, of course, turns his mind to thoughts of banging, an act tacitly discouraged by the party except for the purposes of making smaller citizens. See, Winston is repressed as all get out, just like the rest of the party citizens, and it's really starting to get on his nerves that he can't just have a nice night with a woman he likes and who likes him back and has more personality than a wooden mannequin. We also learn about the proles, that is, the uneducated working class, or proletariat, which according to Winston are controlled by the government by way of propaganda, bread, and circuses, and the occasional thought policeman eliminating the ones that seem inclined to ask inconvenient questions. See, proles are allowed an unexpected degree of freedom of action, in the same way that a cow is generally allowed to graze wherever it wants. The proles are given certain freedoms to keep them complacent, because that way they stay docile and harmless. The proles are relied upon to keep the infrastructure running, to breed, and to provide occasional trysts with the horrendously repressed party members, because frankly the party couldn't care less what the proles do in their spare time as long as they do it untraitorously. Winston believes that the proles may be their only hope of revolution, since they make up 85% of the population and could easily overpower the party if they rose up. But unfortunately, the party has succeeded in keeping them complacent and unwilling to rise up, or rather, they don't even know that they should be rising up because their lives are actually pretty cushy, and the few proles that have access to the news obviously only have access to the party propaganda. Since the only truth they know is the one the party gives them, and they're discouraged from exercising curiosity or questioning the party, the proles live in comfortable, entertained ignorance, while the 15% of the population that might possibly think they should rebel are so rigidly controlled as to make it impossible. Winston also contemplates the fact that his problem with the world he lives in isn't that it's cruel or dystopic or whatever, it's that it's boring. And it sounds dumb, but hear him out. The party projects an ideal of megastructures, shining cities, a glorious and terrible future of beautiful people and even more beautiful conquest. But the practicalities of the party are dingy office environments, bombed out apartment complexes, poor health, a constant melancholic distaste for reality, and a longing for a past that the party claims never existed. Winston once again considers the malleable past and what it means for him to seemingly be the only party member who's bothered by this. He wonders if he's crazy, but he's not so much worried about being crazy as he is about being wrong. But good news, Winston's life isn't totally bleak. In fact, he's got faith in one particular coworker, a man named O'Brien, who Winston has a feeling might possibly share his thoughts about the party. He might even, he thinks, be a member of the fabled Brotherhood, the nigh-mythical rebellion led by Goldstein that no one's sure really exists. Regardless of the veracity of the rebel movement, Winston somehow trusts O'Brien as a kindred spirit in an ocean of unfeeling puppets. While contemplating truth and memory and gaslighting and all that jazz, Winston has a bit of a revelation, which I think bears repeating in its entirety because I really like it. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease with which any party intellectual would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer. And yet he was in the right. They were wrong, and he was right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid world exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall toward the Earth's center.
Water is not wet. Water makes things wet.
The feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien, and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 makes 4. If that is granted, all else follows." So Winston decides to be a little rebellious and goes for a walk, which, while not strictly illegal, is definitely frowned upon by the party as a whole. Winston stumbles into the antique shop he bought his precious diary from in the first place, and in the fury of curiosity, sidles in and takes a look around. The friendly proprietor gives him a rundown of various ancient artifacts like a paperweight and some old prints, and the shop doesn't have a telescreen, which leaves Winston feeling uncharacteristically at ease, as he can't be being observed by the party at this point. The shop and the upstairs room feel oddly familiar and comforting, relics of the world he half remembers from his childhood but never got a chance to appreciate. And the old proprietor himself, Mr. Charrington, is also a walking goldmine, casually expositing old nursery rhymes and notable but long since destroyed buildings. Winston leaves in a good mood, which immediately dissolves into panic when he spots the very girl who he'd noticed at lunch and assumed had been spying on him. Since this is no part of town for a party member, obviously she must be following him, and she probably saw him go into the shop, too. So obviously Winston turns to thoughts of murder, decides he really doesn't feel up to it, and starts considering suicide instead. But he holds off, and this turns out to have been a good idea when 4 days later he runs into the girl again, and when he helps her up after a fall, she slips him a love note. Turns out her name is Julia, and she's had her eye on him and the Prole neighborhood because she shares his distaste for the party and his passion for some nice non-wooden banging. After about a week of desperate maneuvering to try and get the chance to have a conversation with this girl without the party getting suspicious, they manage to get somewhere private and even kinda pretty, and share some chocolate, listen to the birds, and then have some genuinely nice anarchic sex. Interestingly, Winston learns that Julia has done this before with lots of men, and he finds that really hot, because the party espouses purity and virginity and stuff, and Julia expressing her bodily autonomy by being the polar opposite of a virgin is super attractive to our rebellious hero. So they carry on a surreptitious romance over the following months, wherein they manage to have a whole conversation and also some sex while holed up in a bombed-out bell tower. They discuss why the party is so anti-sex, and it turns out it's entirely for practical reasons. First of all, the party wants to keep the population wound up like a spring so that they have boundless energy to be spent on patriotism, and second, if the people had a way to be really, truly happy, why would they care about catering to Big Brother? This is probably also why the chocolate is so bad. So Winston decides to be really rebellious and surreptitiously rents the upstairs room in Mr. Charrington's antique shop so that they can have a comfy, nostalgic place free of surveillance where they can bang without having to plan it for a whole month in advance. They have a lovely afternoon where Julia smuggles out a mess of real, quality food like bread and jam and real sugar and even some coffee and tea. Julia also managed to get a hold of a makeup kit and dolls herself up a little, continuing the trend of embracing her identity as a woman as an act of rebellion against a party that owns her right to bodily autonomy. So the plot continues as the year advances toward the
Okay, again, what I am quickly realizing here while watching this video from Red is yes, a lot of my issues with 1984 stem from the way that Orwell decided to write it, not the ideas themselves. And kind of, I've always said this. I've always pretty much said this, that I've never been against the ideas trying to be discussed within 1984. It is the way that they are conveyed by Orwell that I just find to be just horrible or poorly done.
holiday known as Hate Week, which is heralded by an increase in nationalist propaganda and also bombing, which riles the proles up in a very pro-party, hate foreigners sort of way. Meanwhile, Julia and Winston enjoy some genuinely relaxing quality time together, squirreled away in their hidden antique bedroom while contemplating how super, super dead they are when they get caught. They also discuss their differing views on the party and the people it governs. Julia thinks everyone secretly hates it and would rebel if they could, but doesn't believe there's some secret organized rebellion trying to sabotage it from within. Winston, meanwhile, believes complacency runs rampant through some of the population, but there could be a secret cabal of rebels working to take the party down and save them all. Julia also doesn't believe that a war is really happening. She suspects the party is bombing its own people to keep them angry and on their toes, which is disturbingly plausible even though it turns out to not be true.
Oh.
So later on, O'Brien stops Winston in the hall and casually gives him his address, promising to lend him a copy.
Is that, do we get verification that it is not true that the party is bombing its own people, that they are actually at war?
Of the latest Newspeak dictionary, but Winston is pretty sure that he's actually going to give him a copy of Goldstein's Guide to Rebelling Against the State. But before that, he has a dream about his mother and realizes something else about the party. They convince their citizens that how they feel about stuff doesn't matter. More specifically, how they care about other people. They're taught to dismiss things like human life. A building getting bombed is just another crater, and the people who died weren't much of anything, really. Compassion and empathy are completely squashed, most obviously for outsiders, but more impressively, even for other citizens. He contemplates that when they inevitably get caught, he's going to focus on not betraying Julia. As in, he's not going to let the party make him stop loving her. He and Julia agree that no matter what the party makes them say, it can't make them believe it. Let's hope that works out for him. So Winston and Julia seek out O'Brien to try and join the rebellion. He grills them on what they'd be willing to do for the rebellion, everything but separate as it turns out. Then he tells them that he'll send them a super secret rebellion handbook and sends them on their way. So Hate Week rolls around, complicated somewhat by the fact that the party is abruptly at war with someone different than they were at the beginning of the week, which means 5 years of propaganda needs to be rewritten very suddenly to accommodate the change. So poor Winston has been horrifically overworked for the past 5 days rewriting history, but he finally manages to get his work done and crawls up to the antique bedroom to read A Beginner's Guide to Overthrowing an Oppressive Regime. The book is a pretty solid rundown of the real history of the world, as well as a comprehensive study of why exactly the party is at war all the freaking time. The answer is, as it always is, cheap labor and free resources. But more importantly, we learn why this dystopia happened, and you're gonna love this. It's because the vision of the future that was held in the wake of World War I was that the future would be bright and luxurious and every citizen would be educated. And that is what inspired the party to make such a grody dystopic world. If the people become educated, they're gonna realize they don't need the bourgeoisie. A hierarchical society can only be maintained by keeping the majority of the population both poor and ignorant. Poverty wasn't enough, and just strangling the economy wasn't working, so they started the wars, because nothing keeps a population more poor and more ignorant than the routine devastation of their entire world. War destroys supply and therefore creates demand, and when your citizens are overworked to the point of insanity just to break even, they don't have time to do inconvenient things like learn or think. War is a socially acceptable method of wasting absurd quantities of material and resource in a way that also directs the dissatisfaction of your citizens outward, at some evil foreign party, so they never question why the war is happening and who started it for what reason. They just embrace the certainty that their government is protecting them from the greater evil. They embrace the far-off victory with a religious zeal, and in the meantime will accept any sacrifice to see it through, even though the party has a vested interest in keeping the war going forever in order to maintain their status quo. Also, the book notes, the party has removed the concept of science and empirical evidence from the English language in order to better facilitate keeping the working population ignorant and unquestioning. It also turns out that all three of the world's supercountries, Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia, all follow basically the same dystopia how-to guide with marginally different names, and their social structures are all identical. The Beginner's Guide to Eating the Rich also outlines the structure behind the party and how it conspires to keep everyone simultaneously complacent and full of zealous rage at the enemies of the state, ferociously angry and loyal, but not too put out of their way, and therefore unlikely to take action beyond government-mandated hating the foreigner sessions. And of course, doublethink is in place to make sure that even when faced with stuff that makes literally no sense, our enterprising citizens can still put their total faith in the party without too much cognitive dissonance. Unfortunately, he's barely gotten through this part of the book when they discover that the quaint picture hanging on the wall has been, in fact, hiding a telescreen the whole time. So basically, they've been under constant surveillance since the first day they came up here, and the party absolutely heard the whole thing about the tough guide to dismantling the government, and also probably all the sex. Whoops. So it turns out the charming old shop owner, Mr. Charrington, was a member of the Thought Police all along, and Winston and Julia get super arrested. Winston gets dumped in a cell to wait for, like, ever, while in the meantime, along with a string of other prisoners, two of his co-workers get dumped in with him, one for failing to remove the word God from a poem, the other for saying treasonous things in his sleep. The days wear on, and Winston observes that whenever a prisoner is told that they'll be taken to room 101, they always freak the hell out. While he's pondering this, O'Brien comes in, whereupon it becomes clear that O'Brien himself is also a member of the Thought Police, because Winston's day wasn't bad enough already. So they take Winston, and O'Brien tortures the crap out of him for a while to get the standard confessions out of him, and then tortures him some more in order to cure his faulty memory that makes him remember events the party says never happened. O'Brien systematically and calmly dismantles every memory he has that doesn't line up with acceptable reality, and poor Winston once again revisits the age-old existential crisis of did that happen or did I imagine it? O'Brien explains that it's an error to believe that reality is anything close to objective. After all, the only access you have to reality is through your own perceptions, and can't your perceptions be wrong? Really, it's Winston's fault for failing to properly.
See, again, such a good thing. Just the way, from what I remember from the book, the way it was conveyed just was so poorly done.
Really manage his perceptions of reality so as to make him think that the things he saw had to be real. By the way, if you were wondering what inspired the Four Lights scene from Star Trek Next Generation, it's this exact scene where O'Brien tortures Winston until he agrees and really believes that he's holding up 5 fingers instead of 4. O'Brien explains to Winston that even though they're super gonna kill him, they're gonna fix him first. So they do something weird to his brain, and for about 30 seconds, he's actually complacent, the way the party wants him to be. He sees 5 fingers, he remembers that he made up his perceptions of reality, all that good stuff. He snaps out of it, but he wants to go back because it felt right. It felt like he was finally sane by the standards of society. So that fun situation continues for a while, and we learn that the Beginner's Guide to Joining the Rebellion was actually written in part by O'Brien in order to entrap wannabe rebels and then cure them of their crazy. O'Brien goes back to the idea that reality is only what exists in the perception of humanity, and therefore by controlling perception, the party controls reality. Winston is pretty insistent that reality is real and something will make the party fall, but his arguments get worn down and eventually he breaks. They plop him down into a cell, let him actually eat and exercise, and he gradually becomes more of a human being while doing his best to re-educate himself in the tenets of the party. He practices doublethink and crime stop, the act of not letting your brain even think traitorous thoughts, and gets decently good at it. He's even comfortable for a change. He's doing super well, but then he has a moment where he cracks and calls out for Julia, showing that there's still work to do. And this is when he gets sent to Room 101. Now, Room 101 is specifically designed to be the worst nightmare of whoever's being sent there. In Winston's case, he's got this terrible fear of rats. See, the idea is that by using Room 101, the party breaks down the last part of the subject's mind, the one component that still holds out in the face of all the other stuff, and using that, makes the subject love Big Brother rather than hate him, completing their assimilation into the party. So they rig up this mask thing with a long cage in front of it, put Winston's face in the mask, and put a bunch of rats on the other end. If O'Brien presses a button, the rats eat Winston's face. Winston panics a little bit more, then screams at them to do this to Julia, not to him. And with that, he is a free man. A free, good citizen who's definitely gonna get shot one of these days, but in the meantime is absolutely free to hang out in a corner cafe, read the paper, and solve the chess puzzles. He'd previously ran into Julia, who also looked rather the worse for wear, and it's really clear that they can't love each other anymore. After all, they both betrayed each other in Room 101, and they both meant it 100%. Winston is every once in a while troubled by intrusive false memories, but overall he's a fine citizen. He's successfully conquered himself and come to terms with the reality in which he lives. Feel-good novel of the century.
You want to know what's good about reading 1984? Not. After you finish it, there's nowhere to go but up. Yeah. V for Vendetta is what happens when you look at 1984 and think, you know who would make the perfect nemesis for Big Brother? The Phantom of the Opera. Can you tell I'm tired of people missing Orwell's terminology? It's like they didn't even read the book. Well, again, it's because of the way that he conveys the whole both sides stuff. He's not like because of the way modern society has kind of warped and tied socialism to Stalin's communism. So this may not entirely be Orwell's fault because of, right, this is what essentially post-Reagan has done, post-Cold War has done, is they have tied the idea of socialism to Stalinism. And because of that, because of the way Orwell wrote 1984 to be, right, taking the authoritarianisms of Stalin and Hitler and combining them into Big Brother, because of that, you have people today, right, the people that are against socialism, looking at this book and pointing like, hey, this is what you're doing. You're doing this bad thing or whatever, right? That's kind of what I see as the problem here. Thought policing is not people disagreeing with stuff you've said. I doubt Winston would be pleased to have his weeks of agonizing torture equated to someone calling you a dickhead on the internet. I feel like most of us think they'd be a V if the world fell apart, but most of us would probably be a Winston or a Sign. Good thing the world's not falling apart, right? This has been an overly sarcastic production. Good music, good song choice for this video. And holy shit, this is a long-ass video, longer than I thought it would be. I've got nothing left to say here. Maybe this will be the last time I talk about 1984 on this channel. I would like it to be. I just don't like this book, man. The prose I just did not like. I did not like the way Orwell conveyed things, right? And then, of course, there's the unintentional problems that Orwell's writing has caused, right? Like, it was not the intention of the developers and writers of Skyrim for real world racists to latch onto the Stormcloaks, right? It wasn't their intent. But it is what happened because of the way that they naively or right, the way that they conveyed the Stormcloaks, right? The way that they portrayed the Stormcloaks allowed for those people to latch onto them, right? And benefit of the doubt, latch onto them. They wrote them unintentionally that way, right? But even though it was not your intent, it is still the fallout of your actions, right? That is still problematic. And it is still something that we need to discuss and talk about. and why authors need to be aware of this thing. Writers and authors need to be aware of this kind of stuff and scrutinize their work to make sure that they aren't, you know, allowing that to happen for their own personal work, right? I do not want a certain group of people to latch onto my work, right? So I make it very clear uh the good, like, my personal beliefs and thing, like my beliefs, right? And the good stuff or whatever, right? I make it very clear. Or I try to. Of course, still need to have editors and sensitivity readers read it and make sure that being I'm not doing anything unintentional that I do not want. So anyways, that was Modern Classic Summarized 1984 by OSP. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.